welcome to the Tuesday, November 6th Board of Education meeting at Byram Hills. I want to call the meeting to order at just about 7:03 and propose that we have executive session to meet on 4 matters: 2.1 personnel matter, individual employee; 2.2 Board of Education matter, succession planning; 2.3 district matter, transportation; 2.4 contract matter, individual employee. So with that, I ask for a motion to go into executive session.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Okay, we're going to break and we'll be back shortly. Welcome to the November 6th Board of Education meeting for Byram Hills. Why don't we stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we originally called the meeting to order in public session at 7:03, then we went into executive session. We spoke about already the matters that were discussed, and so we are ready to go to item 4, which is comments from the public. And I would ask at this time if there's any comments from the public related to matters that are not on tonight's agenda. Hearing none, I would ask the board for a motion to adopt tonight's agenda. So moved.
Second.
All in favor? All right, motion carries. And then I would ask the board for a motion to approve the consent agenda, item 6, personnel; 7, special services; and 8, business. So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, motion also carries, and we thank the BHEF in that motion for, under the business consent agenda, we accepted a $7,500 grant on wellness for life initiative for Coleman Hill, which is excellent.
And we'll provide our Coleman Hills students with a presentation and some in-classroom experiences with a speaker who's going to help them with self-skills, coping skills, anxiety skills, interacting with others. It's very positive and motivational, so we're looking forward to that and appreciate the BHEF's donation.
Great. So with that, we go to item 9, which is review of some policies.
Sure, thank you. Thanks to the policy committee. We have 4 policies that are up for a first read. I'll just go through each and tell you why, what has been changed in these and why we brought them to the policy committee. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. The first one is policy 1530, smoking, tobacco use, and use of smoking devices.
Are we in favor of that?
Premises. We are in favor of preventing it.
Ah,
so yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure which of you was.
We brought this to the policy committee because of a change in public health law regarding e-cigarettes, which we are calling smoking devices in our policy to be more generic. Also, there's some changes where we have to have signage in our district vehicles, which we currently do not have, so we will be purchasing signage and putting them in all district vehicles. Must have no smoking signs.
What's considered a district vehicle? Anything that seats more than X people?
Just
Anything
anything owned by the district.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We own cars?
I think we do.
Yeah, they're all
Vans,
cars,
trucks.
There'd be like a no
You-
smoking sign in the car as well,
Yeah.
like a cab.
Transportation
Yep, just like a
department
cab.
has, they call them buses, but some of them are cars.
Right, so we will be adding signs to vehicles. We also will update signage throughout our fields, which we do have some. Steve Thompson was already in the process of doing that, so I said, buy some more signs, we need them for the vehicles. So that's policy 1530.
Speaking of smoking, do we have enough no pet signs?
You look at me.
Do we have enough no pet signs on the fields?
We do.
I think we
Do
do,
we?
and we
We're
have it
sufficiently
like, it's
non-petted?
the first sign you hit on the way down the
It is,
hill
yeah.
to the high school.
It always seems to be a parent or two convinced it's not, doesn't apply to them, and they have these either large dogs, mini dogs, or average-sized dogs, and we try to point the sign to them, and they say, oh, I didn't see the sign.
I know
We
I've
do
had
have numerous
conversations about
parents
it.
that drive to pick up their kids and they have the pet in the car. I mean, that's like a
I
different
don't think if they actually
scenario.
come to an athletic event at the
Oh.
high school, the middle school, and have their dog on a leash or
Yeah.
something. It's,
I've seen Rob ask people to.
Wait, I do that all the time. Are you not allowed to do that?
You can do it in your car. You just shouldn't let them out of the car.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We address it when we see it.
Speaking of dogs,
So we do enforce the smoking
I told
policy.
them.
If students are caught smoking, we do have our code of conduct which addresses the punishment for that.
And that's suspension, correct?
2 days automatic, so 2 days, I believe. Yeah. So that's 1530. Then we have policy 2340, which is notice of meetings. This was updated to reflect the open meeting law, which talked specifically about electronic notices or streaming, or both of those issues. So if a board meeting is going to be streamed, or if there's video conferencing, that was addressed, and electronic notices that we have to notify electronically the community of any of our board meetings. So we made a few adjustments to this policy. It's policy 4600. This was a big change. This is counseling and guidance programs, and I told you previously that this was coming down over the past year. The Board of Regents has been changing the guidance and counseling program regulations. So there are 4 major changes. I'll summarize them briefly. If you have more questions, I can answer those. One is that students in grades K through 5 now need to have access to a certified school counselor. That's new. That has not been in place before. Also, that person needs to give direct instruction based on the program and be involved in developing a program for K-5 students. We're not too concerned about this. We do have some thoughts about how we're going to manage this. That doesn't mean it needs to be a full-time person. So we are giving thought to how we will have access to a school counselor for students in K-5. But I've already met with principals. We already have the program in place. We're confident that we'll meet that pretty easily. But once we decide who will be in charge of K-5 guidance, we will involve that person in the development of the program.
So that's in addition to the school psychologist?
Yes, right. Must be a certified school counselor. That's in the regulations.
We were anticipating this, and we're staffed at the middle school with enough shared staff to have so that we don't increase a position for this.
Second major change is that there needs to be a plan, an annual progress review plan that has to happen for students in 6th through 12th grade. So that means we have to find a mechanism where we can keep track of students' career and educational plans for every student. We already do this in terms of the program. Counselors meet with students regularly. We give guidance on their educational program. What we don't have is a system for tracking that electronically. So we're already evaluating that in terms of systems we already have at the high school level. We use Naviance for those who have students applying to college are familiar with that. We're looking at buying a module for that will serve this purpose.
So it's almost like having a system to store the conversations that
Exactly.
are oftentimes already happening.
Exactly.
Is that
But this
what-
broadens it out beyond academics.
It does, yeah. Career plans and academic monitoring.
does this have anything to do with the analytics program you were talking about?
No, this is a
last
different
time?
plan. Yeah, this is different. Right. Third,
I mean, the data
there's
dashboard.
the dashboard.
Could have a
This is a different.
dashboard for counseling.
Right, it could be that. Third, we have to give annual reports to the board on updating our guidance plan and an update to the plan. And we have to have an advisory committee that meets at least twice a year that advises on both the policy and the guidance plan. And those are things that we're already looking at putting into place. So those.
So
will be
is
the
it,
new
because
additions.
when I read this, I was trying to figure out, is it an update on the plan or is it an update on the synopsis of the findings of all the counselorings? You know,
It's actually
I think
both.
It's both,
Yeah, it
yeah.
includes both. There's definitely changes to the regulation and the plan, then there's the plan itself, which now, there always was a guidance plan that was reviewed periodically, though it wasn't required that it was reported to the board annually, and there wasn't a committee that was required. So those are all additions.
Do you think this is to make students more focused? So if they really want like a pre-med court, like why do you think they're going all the way down?
It's probably to get school districts to be more involved with kids and what the kids' futures are like at a younger age than they might do.
Career, which we
Yeah.
have a career in
Yeah.
6th grade,
Yeah.
but that's probably why.
And
they're
probably
thinking
to
about that.
decrease the amount of like disengagement and
Right.
kids that drop
Keep
out.
kids in school, like they have a
Yep,
better,
trying to increase graduation rates and keep kids focused on school.
So it really
And early
doesn't apply
identification.
to our district since we have a high graduation rate. It's
Very,
more-
very high.
Yeah, these are things, most of the, when you look through the regs, most of the things we do already. It's just,
We just need a counselor.
these
in
4
the
things are
schools
all
now.
new things that I'm highlighting for you that we don't have in place.
An unfunded
The
mandate.
direct student services piece, where that begins and where that ends with respect to, say, counseling a child's getting in and out of school, I mean, that seems like a pretty open-ended,
Yeah.
does that,
It is open-ended. I think the principals will be involved in that, because I think
Yep.
the principals K-5 are highly involved in the student plans
Right.
and what students are doing. So that counselor, we do have school psychologists that are involved. I think that person's going to be more liaison to meet this, and we're going to evaluate where we think that person is really needed.
And this advisory council, is it, what types of people sit on it?
Yeah,
Is
it says stakeholders, so they don't dictate it, so we'll determine the makeup of that.
we're
So
kind of
we'll-
anticipating something, Mike McGrath does his counseling meetings at the high school, that perhaps at the end of those meetings, he could have at the beginning and end of the year, these 2 advisory groups meet.
Got it.
and include some parents from that group.
And we could maybe see, we had talked about maybe if that makes sense, to have a board liaison sit in on those if we talk a couple times a
Sure.
year, that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, so Mike is reviewing all of this now. He started looking at it last year. Now that the regs have been official, he's doing a formal review of it. I meet regularly with him to review where we are in this process. So we feel pretty confident in where we are. And then finally, this is before you again, it's charging school meals, which we just looked at last year, policy 8505.
American
There
Express.
were some additional changes to the regulations and clarification to ensure that we are not shaming students, that we're eliminating the possibility of shaming, and there was some language that was put in to make sure when a student's balance, for example, falls below the minimum, that students don't have money, that there's no way that we're identifying those students. So we had to put some language to clarify some things that we're
Byron
not
bucks.
doing, like putting a wristband on kids saying you can't eat lunch today because you don't have money, and things like
Yeah.
that.
The classic cheese sandwich.
Yeah,
Right.
that's been
It's not an
eliminated.
identifier,
Yeah.
that alone is an
I
identifier.
thought it's a scoop of rice, that scooper.
Right. So we added those specifics and then also cleaned up some other language. So the policy committee feels pretty good about this.
And I like it because everybody's in the mode of protecting children, and I think that's what he's done.
Yep. So that's a first read for you. If there's any further questions.
The only quick thing I had was on 2340, the second to last paragraph, there's just like the last line, it should be state.
I caught
Yep,
that. I
okay.
got it already. Thanks. Thank you. Yep.
Anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, should we
Move to approve as a first
Yep.
read.
Perfect.
A second.
All in favor? All right,
Great. Thank you.
great, thanks, Tim.
Thanks.
On to cybersecurity.
Okay, well first, before we even begin with Andrew Taylor, I would like to introduce our student of the, for the board's purpose, our student of the month from the Board of Education. We have Abby Quinteri here, and Abby is studying in the high school in the Global Scholars Program, and she's interested in cybersecurity, and she joins us with her dad tonight. And I told her what an active role we really love students to take in our processes here. So if this is something that actually intrigues her, we would look forward to seeing you do some of this work with Dr. Taylor and others. So welcome, and thanks for coming. And tonight, Andrew's going to talk about cybersecurity. As one of the board goals under security, the board requested that we really assess these prevention strategies that protect our data. So how are we responding to data breaches, continued training of staff, IT security and awareness, monitoring third-party storage, and applications. So Andrew Taylor, our Director of Technology and Professional Development, is going to speak to us about that.
Great, so thank you for having me. Today I'm going to give a quick overview of some of the legislation that's out there, what's guiding us, and some of the things that dig deep into a couple of the areas within those legislation and give you some of the things that we're doing here at Byram Hills this year. So start quickly going over this, and I think you if you haven't received this presentation, I'll give it to you afterwards, but there's links in here to all the legislation and links throughout it that you can, if you want to dig in deeper later on, go through some of this. But there's three main federal laws that guide us: the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, PPRA, and the Child Online Privacy Protection Rules, COPA. FERPA is really looking at who has access to what records. PPRA is really looking at the rules that govern schools. And COPA is looking at sites that service students under the age of 13 and over 13 and give some guidelines for them. New York State, until recently, didn't have any formal laws governing data. A couple of years ago, New York State Education Law Section 2D was approved. 2D was a broad collection of requirements that didn't necessarily have any regulations behind them. The state was really looking to do a couple things, and that was balance privacy and security with transparency. So they're really looking at what rules and controls can we put in place to make the data more secure, but then also when there's a breaches and how can we let parents and the community know what data points we're collecting on students and where they're being collected and how they're being secured. In schools, we have this third sort of leg of this stool, which is technology and usability. So all of these control mechanisms we put on data actually reduce usability. So whenever we put in new control mechanisms, it makes it that much harder to make that data point open to the community or to teachers to use that information. The 2D law put into action this whole series of events at State Ed where they were now creating regulations based on the 2D law. So over the past year, they've been working at State Education Department through a variety of different focus groups to collect the regulations and to develop regulations. And they've been doing a series of workshops throughout the state showing off where they are and what they've been doing. This is the main areas of 2D law. First was to hire a chief privacy officer. They hired a privacy officer who's actually a former lawyer. So the actions coming out of State Education Department act as if they're being developed by a former lawyer because they're very legal centered. It's all about sort of compliance. And that's really where their focus is. It's not really providing support or to districts in securing their data, but it's how can we create more compliance around the data world. And you can tell it's about compliance because it's really a collection of very vague recommendations, not necessarily specific recommendations of what you might want to do as a district. And this is something as tech directors we've been really working with the state to develop, go beyond compliance and how can you actually support districts in securing data and vetting software applications.
Quick question on the state, actually.
Mhm.
So other than, obviously, state test scores, which they're the ones that they create them, so they have those, and then they get a certain amount of information from us to come up with the report cards and all the reporting that gets done by SED that's out on the website for anybody to look at. Other than that, do they collect any other data? Do they have requirements where they're collecting data these days around?
Sure. We have new data elements that we're asked to collect every single year. Last year we were asked to revise the way we collect information on country of origin for students. And no longer, we used to be able to have that as one of our data elements. We don't have country of origin anymore as a data element. We actually look at things like where you spent your education for the last 3 years. And if it was outside of the country in the last 3 years, then we start the process of ESL services. So there's new data points. There's some other data points that we were asked to collect last year around military service of family members. So we've had to add that information. And sometimes we're asked, like, can you give us this information for the last 3 years when we were never actually told to actually collect it.
And is it per student or is it general?
Sounds like Albany.
It could be both. It could be both depending on the use and how we're reporting it. So a lot of this data is housed in a data repository that is run by the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center or the state data repository. One of the things as far as looking at how we use data, one of the things we're asking is, oftentimes we're asked to extract stuff out of the state reporting system to formulate it in a new type of report and then put it back into a new system. Now, what they're basically saying is take data from us, reorganize it, and give it back to us. That's just really a place where you have data failure. The data becomes less reliable because we're manipulating it. So you have access to these data, why don't you run the reports to yourselves? And so we're trying to get them to use the systems that we have in place to make what they're requiring us to do a little bit more seamless.
When they're given this data, I'm assuming they're being given it with some sort of a unique identifier, there's no personal information being found?
Depending on the data. I mean, for like state reporting data, we have to go down to personal identifying numbers, a state number for the student, so there is data that's being passed there directly to the state.
But it's an ID number, they're not being given people's names.
Again, it depends on the data.
Oh, okay.
There is some points where they are given names. Yeah.
Hopefully they have good cybersecurity.
I know, it's just, makes me
Actually,
sick.
we've asked for some of that from them. Like, for example, you know, we could eliminate some things, but when you're asking us to go towards by 2020 computer-based assessments, well, now you just mandated that we
That's
do
right.
certain things that we wouldn't have had done in the past.
Right.
And so, yeah, then we've asked for them, can you give us your privacy policy for your
Right.
computer assessment
Yeah.
systems?
Right.
And
These
where's
are
the
pushbacks that
database?
we're trying to give to make sure that what we're doing that they're requiring us to do is actually meeting the requirements of the law.
And I would just add that if there are certain issues that you see that all school districts face around some of these issues, because I think that's a fair question, just like they should ask of us, then through the School Board Association, that might be something that should be on the agenda
Right.
to just continue to push from a advocacy perspective around some of these issues.
I sat on a panel discussion on Friday at a conference with the Chief Privacy Officer, actually. I was on a panel with them, and that's the two things that I asked for them is, one, they're asking for us to vet every application that we use as a district, which is great, but they don't give us any criteria to vet the applications against. And now they're having actually 700 plus schools all vet the same applications. Why don't we have a repository? We just have, you vet them
Right.
once as a state, and then we can just go and we can get it
Right,
off the
right.
repository. We have no power as a small district, but the state has an enormous power of having companies change their privacy policies that we can't do. They're not going to change, a large company's not going to change it for us, but they might for the state if they had to
Right.
get approved. So there's little things like that that I think that they
GDPR,
could do, but they really want hands off. They just want to sort of say, we've got regulations and that's kind of up to us to all.
Are we allowed to
Enforce
ask them how the data is going to be used, and is it going to be shared with another party? I mean,
We are, and well, for that example right there, I mean, they're saying, well, they can't do that because it's local control, but they've actually abandoned local control a long time ago when they went to the APPR and they started vetting rubrics for us, and they started vetting software that we had to use to evaluate teachers.
That's right.
They've already opened that door by saying, we can do this job of vetting applications and vendors for you because we've done it in the past. So it depends on the system. So that's the type of thing that we're trying to push back a little bit on them. So the one thing that they did do is they vetted a whole bunch of different standards, and they went with the National Institute for Standards and Technology 800-171, which basically has a variety of different control mechanisms that they require that you as a district or you as an entity. This is actually used by federal agencies as well, not just schools. It's used by CIA, FBI, and other places use these same sort of criteria. And they've really identified 14 control systems that you have to look at. Access controls, trainings, audits and accountability, configurations. So these are these seem like a pretty simple, but when you dig into one of them, like access controls, I'll take a look at just access controls for you. Access controls, there's three main, and there's some companies will say there's like 8 main, but there's 3 main types of access control. Physical controls, which is looking at keypads and cameras and things like that to secure your data. Administrative controls, looking at policies and procedures and how you handle data. And then technical controls, things like firewalls and ways of stopping people from intruding into your systems. But then you have to get a little bit deeper inside of these access controls, and you look at the complexity of the threat that you're trying to prevent. Is it a general threat, like you need to do patches and upgrades and you need to keep things up to date for these general types of threats that you might be out there? Or is it a specific known threat that's been going around that you need to patch specifically for because you know it's happening in local schools or across the country that you need to address? Or is it a specific threat that's happening right now? You've got ransomware on your system, and how do you deal with that? So that's going from preventative to detective to corrective actions and controls. So we have to kind of like overlay all of these, and this is just a sampling. I don't want to give you all the controls because it really wouldn't be good to give everything out in a public meeting. But these are some sampling of some of the types of things that we do in each of those when you cross-reference. What is a physical control that's preventative? Things like cameras and locks on doors, those are physical controls. What are physical controls that are detective and corrective? And we've used many of these in incidents that we've had in the past. If you're interested, I can tell you a couple of them, but we've had incidents here which we've had to solve and how we responded to them. So when you get down to it, really what we want to do is create this sort of culture around the data where we're looking at the people, the technology, and the processes that we have. So the people, what staff do we have looking at the data and controlling the data, the technology staff, the staff in general that has access to data. The processes, the policies, procedures, regulations, and then the technology that we're using, firewalls, viruses, scanners, threat intelligences, things like that. All of this is to really stop 4 main things with our data, and that is theft, actually someone coming in and stealing data off our systems, loss, inadvertently having data get lost or misplaced, neglect, not taking a user off the system that might have access to data, neglecting the processes that we have in place. Or insecure practices, like not actually having a practice of how to collect data or how to securely secure the information. But really, this is this is the truth. Depending on what research you look at, 90–95% of all data breaches are people breaches. They're actually human problems. So when you look at a lot of the research, it really says that the people are our weakest link. I kind of like to turn that around a little bit and say people can be our strongest link if we really take it and work with them well and develop training and develop great policies. They can actually be our advocates for data. I don't know if we're actually there yet, but I think that we've got some plans that we're working on where we can really start developing a better culture around how we look at data and how we use data. So looking at the people in the system, really, this is where we're moving this year, is looking at a new model of how we address training and data use inside of the system, and that's the CIA triad. CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and providing training in a whole bunch of different ways, from videos to online training to large faculty meetings, small group trainings, using our PLCs, looking at approaching it through a lot of different lenses in a lot of different ways with staff. When I talk about staff too, what's important is, in the past, we talked about our community, and it was really about students and teachers, but we really need to go beyond that. We need to start looking at our custodial staff, our clerical staff, who have access to valuable data and access to systems that have data in it that we need to start training as well. And that might be an area that I think schools in general have fallen a little lax on. How do we address those specific groups and what data they have access to? So confidentiality is looking at, like, how do you make sure the information is still, the right people have access to the information. Integrity, the data doesn't get changed in a way that makes it not usable anymore or invalid. And then looking at availability, all the right people have the right information in their hands. And that gets a little bit harder because some of our systems aren't built for us to isolate data down to the individual data points. So we have to clump data into collections of data and give access based on collections, not exactly this piece of data, where we're trying to work around mechanisms to say that, okay, well, this person can have everything but this piece of data because it's really not necessary for their work. This year, these are some of the things that we're focusing on. This is my department's goal this year is around data as well. So we've got a lot of different initiatives we're working on. We're reviewing our physical and virtual access controllers that we have in place. We're going to be doing some testing this year, some penetration testing, actually having people from the outside see if they can hack in and do some penetration testing. We're going to do some external and internal audits. We're already contracting with a group called Amplified IT, who's going to audit our Google domain and look line by line through our Google domain, which 60% of our traffic and 60% of our use and our data is in Google right now, through the Google Docs. It's a heavily used product. You would be shocked at how many users we have in there every day. I think it was like 40,000 users in a week we've had in our Google Classroom alone.
40,000 unique
40,000 unique hits, logins. So it could be the same person logging in 3 or 4 times, but 40,000, I mean, that's still multiple people logging in.
people in the street.
Then goes to Indiana, number flies up.
We're getting hacked from everywhere right now. No. So we've also been developed, so this Amplified IT is going to go line by line and give us recommendations on the Google domain to make sure it's as secure as possible. We developed some partnership. I started this this regional think tank of a few different technology directors that are working in this area, and we're developing ways that we can work together to sort of solve the same problems. We've also been working through this group called NYNT, which is our regional technology directors, about 70-some schools are part of that, and working through the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center to look at ways that they're looking at data. We're doing some training work this year. One of the big areas we're looking at is interoperability of applications. Now, this is something that we've been focused on for the last year and a half, 2 years. It's a struggle with schools of how do we get software to talk to each other. A lot of times what we're doing is we're exporting stuff out of one system to import it into another system. Again, manual manipulation, lots of room for error, lots of room for things to get lost. So we're really looking to figure out ways we can get software to talk to each other. We think we got the right application now, and we're on a good path. I think by the end of this year, we should have a good chunk of our applications doing that, pulling directly from eSchool the data that they need and only the data they need.
Can you use APIs?
There are some APIs, but not all, because these are smaller vendors, not all have APIs that can connect into APIs. There are some standards that they have, but again, not all vendors use them. There's some general data standards. Where it gets tricky is when you start looking at rostering, because if you're just looking at naming and emails and some basic, that's easy. But when you get rostering of putting kids in the classrooms and grouping them, it gets pretty complicated, and that's where some of the smaller companies fall through.
When we send data externally, which I'm sure this doesn't happen all the time, but when we send sensitive data, not something that would be non-sensitive, do we have like a protocol where it would be emailed, where you'd send a link, where there would be some like security attached to it?
Dropbox.
Yeah, we usually upload it someplace where it has to be downloaded, and you need a key to download it. We try not to send personal information. There is some cases, just because parent communication, there is something that would be considered personal identifiable information that gets sent through email. Our email does encrypt the data. That's not 100% with any email system. The only way to really truly encrypt data is when you have a key that you give the person on the other side that they have to unlock it. We haven't implemented that yet. It's something that we could look into, but then there's just a whole level of training and support that's needed for that.
Right, and then do you put every email that a parent sends to a teacher would have to go through that process?
If it's going to have like a grade in it, or if it's going to have anything that might have some sort of personal information on that student, you could do that. We've been saying, as of right now, our encryption on that and that's not highly sensitive data, but there is some stuff by state standard would be considered sensitive data.
I mean, a lot of stuff runs through the portal, so that's helpful, because then you have to log in.
We do try to refer back to the portal for most of the things that you need. If you need grades, you need things, all of that's in the portal, so we do try to get, and we do have a high usage on our portal too.
Good.
Not during the day, shut down during the day.
Data security team, we started a data security team that is looking at this and trying to work on a data security manual. Well, we really, when I started looking at how can we really put all this information into one clear place, the emergency manual actually kind of came up to mind. And the things that we do in the emergency team meetings, where we do tabletops around specific things. So that's part of what that regional think tank group is working on. We're working on tabletops that we're all going to do at our school, so that I'm not writing all the tabletops. We each write one or two, and we're going back to our schools to share them in discussions around our team. So here's a breach. This has just happened. What do we do? And go through the procedures of what we would do and how we would approach that type of a breach. We're looking at a data security analyst position where it's working through civil service right now, where that would be someone that would be focused just on data security and physical security within the district, and helping to make sure all of that's sort of tied together. One of the things that we have to realize is that security for data can be anything. For example, the WannaCry virus, which spread, WannaCry malware, it's a ransomware, was spread predominantly through cameras and heating systems. Heating systems and cameras don't always get patched and get updated for security, and some of them they don't even think about that, so they did some backdoors through some IP cameras and IP security systems. So having tight mechanisms all around is important. And then lastly, the thing that we're looking at is paperless. And how do we make things paperless? Because you think about data being lost digitally, but a lot of data loss happens because of paper. An IEP is set down, or someone has a piece of paper that has personal information on it. How do we address those type of things? And to do that, we have to take things like how we register students and emergency contact information, and how can we make those type of tasks paperless so that you do that through the portal and through online forms versus having paper, where what do we do with that paper once it's done? If we throw it out, do we dispose of it? We have to shred it, and that's where possible errors could be too. So we're looking at those processes. So really just leaving you sort of, here's where the state has left us, and they've given us these really high challenging things, but really low support. What we're trying to do as a district is be up here. We want to really, this is a high challenge, a high impact project for us. We want to make sure that our teachers and our staff and our students feel like they've got a lot of support. The big problem is this. You know, if I talk to you right now and I say, how many of you have a smartphone on you? Probably most of you say yes. If I say, how many of you have actually taken pictures of your friends and family on it? Probably most of you say yes. If I say, how many of you have like your dentist and your accountant's contact information in there, and friends' contact information near you? Probably most of you say yes. How many of you got permission to put that contact information and take those pictures from the people? I mean, all of us right there just violated data privacy in a way. How many of you use Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or any of those social networks? All of those ask for your access to your contacts. So now, all of your friends you just gave to all of these third-party companies. The problem with data and security is that we don't know what we don't know yet, and it's such immersed in what we do that we're at this point where we're still learning it and we're protecting it every way we can. But we have to be vigilant. We have to be cognizant that we're constantly learning.
I think that the changing climate that's happening so fast, just something that was recently brought to my attention, which I thought was an absolutely insane thing, is the new iPhone has to log in, it's your face, right?
Right.
It's face it, so you think, oh, that's great, but understanding of that is essentially now that you have, a digital replication of your head. So it's a simple ease of use. You think that's adding security, but that's, now all of a sudden,
They're identical twins.
so exactly.
that's-
So,
Well,
um,
Andrew,
Crazy.
when he was showing me his presentation, if you go back to the last slide, I said, Andrew, who's Jignesh Padiyar? And he goes, I don't know, I got it off of Google. And I was like, yes, exactly. This person and, some contacts and already, yeah.
Two quick questions around that. Just with respect to Google and the pervasive use of Google Classroom and the efficiency and the effectiveness of it. There's lots of concerns around that privacy. I don't know what settings we have, the contractual review. Do you have any concerns with respect to that platform at this point?
So the Google products that we use, the Google EDU products, are all fall under the same security policy that our student information system uses. So they all do this national student privacy policy statement. Google actually abides by that for all of our EDU products, which is Docs and Classroom and all the Drive applications, those type of things. So those ones I feel very confident that are secure. Where the security issue on those products come is inadvertent sharing of data. So whether or not they have a teacher or a student put something up there that might have someone's personal information and then it accidentally hits share with the world. So we do have products though. We have a product called CloudLock that actually goes out and searches for certain types of data. So it searches through all of our drives and looks for things like password, username, IEP, so things that would be sensitive data. It looks for things like that, and then it alerts us if those are being shared, so we can actually talk to the teacher about that, which we have done, and we've actually found things that we've taken offline. Not that they were shared out with the entire world, but they might have been shared with someone outside of our domain. So we try to not share anything outside of our domain unless it's with a third-party contractor like OTPT, something like that we're actually working with. So we do have a product that goes out there and looks at that. We also have a product that same product looks at all of the third-party plugin products into Google and vets them. So it'll tell you whether they're critical or low-level data is being shared. So anything that's highly critical, we instantly take off the sharing policies and take it off our network. If it's low level, we allow teachers to install it.
Andrew, you spoke about the implementation of training for staff and targeting staff that may have not have been, exposed to this type of training before. Will that utilize like the partnership with the other outside vendors you're talking about, or can you explain a little bit what that training will look like and when the timing is for that?
So we do some training now. We do training with teachers and things at the beginning of the year. They get some basic training, and every year they get some refreshers. But some more in-depth training, I think this spring is where we're really looking to roll out a whole series of different trainings. A lot of them we're developing in-house. There are a few things that we're looking at possibly purchasing as training that do more on-demand trainings. There's some options that we're looking at of how we can deliver those trainings. Some of them we might also work with the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center, which also does some training for staff and has a whole data department.
Just my last question around this. Outside of the security, the redundancy or disaster recovery, do we have if something happened to our servers or the building, we have ample backup, and do we have a disaster recovery with respect to IT?
Do we have off-site
Off-site.
backup?
Yeah, we have double redundancy. So we have redundancy on all servers inside. So we have redundancy from our middle school and our high school have hot swap redundancy. So if one fails, it instantly goes over. Actually, there's redundancy inside the server room, and then there's redundancy backup from the middle and high school. All of those are then also backed up off campus in 2 locations, one down in Mamaroneck and then also across the river up in Rockland County. So we have multiple redundancies built in, and we've had to use them before. We actually had a ransomware attack a couple years ago where a collection of files were secured by ransomware. We found it, we isolated the files and replaced them within a day. It was about 3 years ago.
Thanks for being so diligent on us.
Yeah, I appreciate your efforts. It's very important.
You didn't give any Bitcoin, did you?
No, I have to say that there have been many districts that have
Oh, yeah.
paid ransomware. We've never paid anything because we have that redundancy. We can actually just isolate and delete the files, and you have a backup that's a few hours old.
So hopefully we're not targets because we won't pay.
Yeah.
Not gonna, I don't see a reason that we should have to unless our.
We won't pay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, that was great. I wonder if our guest has any questions?
I'm sure she'll have them next week.
I kind of encouraged her to look at this because I thought it would be an interesting topic that not a lot of people would think of. And as the world's kind of moving more digital, there's more and more data that is out there, right? And so, and my company that I work for is all over this. I mean, this is huge topics for my company, and we're developing solutions in this space every day.
Well,
So,
I would
just
say
interested
that
in that.
the younger generation probably has far better insights in this than many of us, certainly more than me.
I just think a lot of people don't know about it.
Yeah.
They have a lot of insight in terms of how to use the devices,
Yeah.
but not a lot of insight into
Well,
security.
Abby, you're right.
They're the ones taking all the pictures.
Abby, what is the focus of your study? The actual main focus?
I'm just in the beginnings of it because we just started, but it's more cybersecurity within educational systems, so it's very similar to this.
And what educational systems have you studied? Colleges, high
I just
schools?
looked at like the generals and kind of like the main things that you need to watch out for ransomware and other cybersecurity issues and cyber threats, and then examples in other schools where this has happened.
So you said who's going to do the training in the spring? I think Abby's going to be doing the student training.
Great.
And probably presenting here at the end of the.
Yeah.
We look
No pressure.
to seeing you here, Adam.
We're in good hands if it's Abby.
Let us know if you have any ideas.
That's right, we should.
All right, well, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And you're welcome to stay or you're welcome to go. Don't feel any
She's
pressure to
probably got
stay.
homework.
And Andrew has early meetings, so you can.
Yeah.
Thank you,
also.
Andrew.
Thank you, bye.
Good night.
Take care, Abby. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have to preserve Andrew for
That's right.
the morning.
Thank you for
So
keeping us
after all the
safe.
focus on cybersecurity, do you put yourself off the grid in your personal life?
Yeah.
Yes, we have downtime at home, so no.
Oh, wow.
Get home safe, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
There was an article in the Times how a lot of these executives in Google, whatever, they don't let their kids on,
There are a couple schools in California,
out there, they don't want the kids on the line at all.
online.
Yeah, yeah,
And they're pushing these systems to school districts.
that's right, that's right.
But they want their own kids to use them.
Yeah.
Actually, I recently saw a presentation by Neil Ferguson, who's the famous
Yeah.
historian around social networks and the analogy to the printing press and the spread of religious communication and books coming out by like Martin Luther in the 1400s, and an analogy to Twitter and the spread of social media. And what it did is they thought it would create these communities, and what it did is it's bifurcated the two sides of thought around these things, and it's really, really interesting around those effects. And he brought up a whole point that he could see in 5 or 10 years that we'll be looking back at screen time, like, when people were smoking and they had a child, pregnant and smoking, just how bad some of it is for our brains. So anyway, just kind of dramatic, but interesting.
Interesting to figure out.
Does he speak about sleep and
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a perfect
About
segue.
school starts.
I actually was at a conference at NYU Friday night that talked about screen time in adolescents and how it's adversely impacting their sleep. It's remarkable, the studies that are coming out, like what it does to your REM sleep. It just disturbs and really negatively impacts. So I think we're going to be.
Well, the filming at the beach, you have to, or when they had the screenagers showing,
Yeah.
and that was,
Yeah.
Yep.
that was a case in point.
Okay. Sleep.
So-
Sleep.
Tonight, I'm going to speak a little bit about a preliminary, our phase one, a discussion about school start times. Of course, I'm not advancing a slide.
Just when our technology left.
Yeah,
Taylor,
of course my slides are advancing.
Andrew, come out of the parking lot.
I know. Sharing to multiple screens. Yeah.
I think you have to pay, I think it's ransomware, you gotta pay to.
We don't pay.
There you go. That's it.
Hallelujah. All right. I did. Didn't work.
We will not negotiate
Okay.
delays.
So, for the public, I mean, the board already knows what the board goals are, but one of the board goals for 2018-19 under Excellence in Teaching and Learning involved student wellness. And we have, thank you, we have been to that end having a lot of support from our Byram Hills Education Foundation to help us and help the community become much more knowledgeable about our student population. And as such, the board, in part of their student wellness goal, included the final line, which says the board will explore school start times. So exploring school start times is something that has to, in my mind, fold out in many phases. We have our recent Stanford University survey results for grades 6 to 12. Those results are telling us that our students are not getting enough sleep. They're spending a substantial amount of time in extracurricular activities and doing homework compared with similar districts. The board's goal seeks to just consider how do our school policies, including school start times, support our student wellness. So the board is really engaging in an undertaking to explore this. Now, Tim, once we get off of that, because you're just going to have to look at my pieces on the slide, everyone. Sorry. I don't know. Once we get off of that. I can only do it with things on there, so there you go. So our wellness goal is to explore school start times, and I will provide, I think, 3 reports between now and approximately May, and it all really depends on when information is coming back to me to help with those reports. And those are going to constitute phases of exploration for the board. And I can't stress enough to the public this word explore and exploration. For the next 3 phases, we are going to be learning a lot of information, and we're in a learning phase. Some school districts move very quickly on this, others take a very long time. For right now, I am anticipating our phases will look like this. So phase 1, research and information, and that's going to happen tonight. I just want to show the board some initial research on sleep and school start times. And while some board members may be very familiar with some of this literature and some of the studies that I'm going to show you, it's really important that we move slowly and that we take in all of that information and don't assume that any board member or the public for that matter is well versed in this. The second phase is sample start times and busing implications. And this is, consider, I started my first page, had an artist's stroke of paint. And that's how I'd like you to consider this. I will look at sample start times, moving middle school and high school start times to 8 o'clock, 8:15, 8:30, not moving elementary start times at this point, and just really saying, if we move to something like that, what would a busing implication be? Now, there are some people who like to write articles and say, oh, busing should never be an issue. It most certainly has to be an issue. It could cost multiple millions of dollars. And then also in that phase, I want to look a little bit, expose the board to what New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey schools have either contemplated or have changed start times. In particular, Greenwich has changed their start time. Ridgefield has been studying it extensively. Katona studied it, and they've decided that they are going to hold on a vote to move school start times, and they want to explore a little further.
Jen, I'm sorry, can I just ask you, why are you keeping it just to the New York and Connecticut area? Is it just because
Because that's where we have data, yeah.
Okay,
And I
okay.
can look at similar schools. So I don't necessarily know, like there are studies I'm going to show you today of 8 schools that were in like Colorado and Wyoming, and there are studies about them.
Right.
I don't know that they're similar populations to
that
us.
makes sense.
So when you see the list of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey schools, you'll see schools that are very similar to Byram Hills in there. Sample Byram Hills start times, and then bus schedule needs, and preliminary, as I said, brushstroke estimates of what that would look like.
And Dobbs Ferry did it, but Dobbs Ferry doesn't have
Doesn't
busing,
have
so
busing,
it's very easy
right.
for them to change their start times.
And as part of that, in addition to the 3 options of different start times, I'd also like to entertain a 4th option, which is if for some reason the board chooses not to move ahead with start times, what would it take to increase our busing service just to make sure kids were not on a bus before 7 a.m.? Right, so that's an important thing to look at in addition to all of this school start time. Keep in mind, our bus routes were created by bus supervisors over the course of however many years we've had buses. We do have people come in and have efficiency experts, but you know, when you're going deeply into changing school start times, you're having real professionals come out who do nothing but transportation studies and efficiency studies. And then phase 3 would be implications. I'd like the board to get a real sense of all of the extracurricular activities, the staff, family implications. We have a lot of extracurricular activities, not only in our organization, but outside of our organization that would be impacted by such a change. We have union contracts, we have family planning to consider, and then time for board additional inquiries and discussion with everything. The 4th phase could be a community input phase, where after the first 3 phases, if there's anybody from the community that would like to speak to the board, I think it would be nice to open up an opportunity for that. These are my proposed phases for discovery for the board at this point. I would anticipate that after phase 4, the board would have to decide, are we going to move ahead with the next steps? The next steps after that could be an action plan, a steering committee, and consultants. Or it could be that the board is choosing not to move ahead at that time. They would like to wait to see what other districts are doing. It's important to note that Westchester Putnam School Boards is doing a very big project right now with all districts in the county. We're all saying the same things. It's just very difficult for individual districts to make this kind of move. And I know from other districts that have made the move that they have had unintended consequences that have occurred. Either teachers and students leaving classes early, very regularly during sports seasons to get kids to sports on time, unanticipated traffic issues that have been happening. So we need to move very slowly with this.
And that happens anyway with our schedule, which is very disruptive, especially in the
Right.
high school,
Right.
with these classes.
Right. So phase 1 today for research and information. I'm going to share with you a policy statement and a press release from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Information from the American Medical Association. We had a great CDC study that talked about later start time for teens improves grades, mood, and safety. I'd like to talk a little bit about things that are happening currently in other parts of the country, California school starts bill, and Boston Public Schools retraction of an approved change to school start times. And we'll have time for board discussion as well. And I apologize for this thing on my screen, but it's really the only way it's working. American Academy of Pediatrics had a policy statement, and I think that this mirrors a lot of what we heard from Challenge Success when they came to visit us and talk to us about the results of their survey. This is really urging schools to have different start times that give kids optimal levels of sleep. They're talking about 8.5 to 9.5 hours. And if you look at some of our information from Stand for Success, our students at the high school reported they get an average of 6 hours and 15 minutes of sleep. Students at Crittenden, an average of 7 hours, 45 minutes. But really, the 8th graders are only getting 7.3 hours. It's the 6th graders that are still going to sleep and getting 8.1 hours. So this is telling us that to get those optimum levels of sleep and improve physical, there's so many studies that have indicated that improved sleep helps with their obesity and depression, health and safety, drowsiness, driving crashes. That was really interesting statistic to me. of the numbers of studies out there that have looked at the amount of student sleep and correlated it with driving issues, academic performance and quality of life. They say, and this has been stressed over and over, it's not just about delaying school start times, but it's also about having this commitment from everyone to other contributing factors. So we have excessive demands on homework and extracurricular activities, after-school employment, social networking, electronics. So, you know, you could start school at 9, and I can't guarantee that a child is not going to spend 3 hours on social networking while in bed on a phone. So this is really reminding everyone that it is not just about school start times. The American Academy of Pediatrics also gave a press release, just finalizing that the start times aren't compatible with this biology of kids at the middle and high school level. Consider start times around 8:30. That predominantly is the message. And then they give this negative impact of chronic sleep loss. And I have here, I want you to note, all of the links so the board can go and actually review all of these articles. In this table, they talk about the impact of chronic sleep loss, and some of the things that really stuck out to me, if you're talking about a wellness goal, is the mental health and behavior piece. That kids become more stressed, more anxious, more depressed when they are sleep deprived, and this is what their studies are finding. But, I mean, the list is relatively long for the chronic sleep loss implications for kids. American Medical Association also adopted a policy in 2016. They're calling on districts to do the same thing. They believe that delaying will help these children at the middle and high school level to get enough sleep. It will improve overall mental and physical health of our nation's young people. Now, some districts have spent a lot of time having doctors and people in the sleep field come and speak to the board about the ramifications of a lack of sleep. I have to say that I don't see that need. I feel pretty confident in the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I would like to spend some of the time talking about what are the options for having something like that. This was a really great research study. I encourage the board to click on the link. It was a CDC study. And these were 8 high schools that moved to later start times. They were in Minnesota, in Colorado, and Wyoming. And they changed the school start time from 8:20 to 8:40, and the findings were interesting. There was
7:20
I'm sorry,
to
7:20 to 8:40, thank you. Findings were interesting. Students reported less depression, feelings of greater efficacy. They showed statistically significant increases in the kids' first period GPAs in 1 or more courses. I'm not sure our kids need to do any better than they're doing, but you know, that's really great. And the start times were 8 to 8:35, so it's not just an 8:30 start time. But they give the same cautionary piece. We have to, this is not the cure. 87.6% of students studied kept their cell phones in their bedrooms. Students studied who participated in extracurricular activities were significantly more likely to get insufficient sleep. Just pretty much the demands on our kids. I encourage you to look at that study. And out of this study, they had some issues that need attention. This is what they thought in the study. Athletic schedules that have to have kids leave before the end of the day need to be explored. When you're rearranging bus schedules, your younger kids might have to take an earlier bus to school. We're not really looking right now to change the 2 elementary schedules in the options I'm going to present to you. We can't simply flip the elementary and middle and high school schedules for multiple reasons. Number one, we cannot have these kindergarten kids out at their bus at 6:40. And the other reason is flipping will only make the high school get to school at 9:15, like a Coleman Hill time. It doesn't work. But they talk about arranging childcare for younger children and parents' work schedules. But some common worries that never materialized in these districts they studied, I thought was interesting. That they think there might be less participation in sports, they didn't find that. Because kids get up later, they choose to stay up later, they didn't find that either, which surprised me. Participation in after school.
Wouldn't it be so much simpler?
I would just stay up till 3, right?
But we can't.
You can't, and
That's
the
true.
American Academy of
Yeah.
Pediatrics talks about the circadian rhythms,
Right.
and that kids are mostly, like, they're not able to go to sleep
They're awake.
before 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and their prime sleeping time is between like 11 and 8 a.m. And what's happening is the time before they're waking is the time of the best REM sleep. So when kids are waking up before they're supposed to, that's actually what results in the sleep deprivation. I'm not a doctor, I'm just playing one right now. But participation in after-school activities might decline. They didn't find that. Kids might have a difficult time getting to after-school employment. And they didn't find transportation costs may increase. Which could mean that for the schools that were studied, they flipped schedules
Yeah.
rather.
I've heard
They flipped in
places where they
Or
flip.
they didn't
Yeah.
flip, right? Is that
And,
right?
and we can't do that.
They didn't? I thought I heard that.
It wasn't, they did a very complicated
Okay, we'll get hear about it later.
restructuring.
Yeah.
About Greenwich, I thought I had heard that they flipped.
So what are some states doing? The state of California, city of Boston. This was interesting. Anthony Portantino, a state senator, wrote a school start bill, and he was trying to get the entire state of California to change their school start time. It was vetoed by the governor. It's now in the Senate. Interesting is the California Teachers Association and the School Boards Association were the groups that opposed the bill. And when they asked the Teachers Association, they didn't comment, but the School Board Association said that working parents don't have the privilege to simply delay the start of their day.
Yeah.
So that's where the school board came in on that. And then it's also just important to note in this process, brush strokes, we need to move slowly, with exploration, not with decisions. Boston retracted their vote to change their school start times, which is interesting for an entire city.
You know, maybe they just didn't want, you know, they wanted it to be more of a local decision as opposed to being dictated by.
That's what
later.
California said originally, and then there was something else that was written into the bill that allowed for rural areas not to necessarily conform to this, and it's still getting hung up right now in the
Do you know
Senate.
why Boston retracted?
They found many complications that would happen as a result of
Wait,
it.
wait,
They
wait,
thought
but-
it wasn't time to move forward.
But this was after they voted to do it.
They did vote to do it.
I mean, the time to retract maybe is to think first before
Yeah.
you vote.
Well, that's what we have to do. That's why I'm
we're doing
showing
simple
you.
brush strokes, so we're
Yeah.
taking our time
Right.
to really delve into it.
In Maryland, they did it as they have county systems, so the whole county system did it at once.
Which is a
So
lot
it's a lot easier,
Yeah.
right? It's a lot
Yeah.
easier.
One other thing I want to point out is that ASCD, the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, and this is a very reputable organization that we are a part of, they put out a bunch of wake-up call fast facts regarding kids' sleep and school start times. And just knowing that we're not alone in this, National Sleep Foundation poll found that 59% of 6th through 8th graders and 87% of high school kids were getting less than the recommended 8.5 to 9.5 hours of sleep on school nights. It's a fallacy that kids can catch up on this sleep on the weekend. 10% of U.S. high schools start their day before 7:30 a.m., 42.5% before 8 a.m., and only 14.4% 8:30 or later. So we are among the masses here. And then something interesting that has been coming out, there have been a few reports, and I included one for the board. At the end, you'll see that I included some additional resources that weren't embedded in the presentation. You'll see the RAND Corporation. They're actually starting to look at, if we start school later, does this actually have benefits to the economy? And there are a lot of interesting facts in there about that, and also a report published by the Brookings Institute, significant increase in test scores with later start times, but estimated later start times create lifetime earning gains. I mean, so there are people even in the financial field that are hopping on board with this.
It's amazing there are studies to that extent that are
There
valid.
are, and they're valid studies.
Yeah.
You know,
That study
the
about
RAND
the
organization and the Brookings Institute are.
There was a study maybe 10, 15 years ago about nap time.
Oh, yes.
And there were a couple of companies that started putting nap rooms and letting their, I think in Japan, they would
Yeah,
let people take.
I would
20
love
minute
pods
naps.
here.
They'd go unused.
Yeah, they would.
Maybe the
I meant
clean
here in
spot.
the office, but they would go. Yeah, Tim and I wouldn't do that. wouldn't
I don't
happen.
think it went anywhere.
Yep. They talk about also the ASCD, the irrefutable benefits with alertness. Everybody's saying the same thing: alertness, memory, attention, cognitive processing, academic performance, reduced depression, anxiety, improved athletic performance. And they were also talking about improved recovery for athletes who are injured, which makes sense.
What about improved teacher performance?
To sleep later? It
Start
depends how
classes
bad the
later.
commute is.
No, seriously, to starting school later, have they shown a concomitant improvement in teacher performance?
Well, maybe that's why the kids are scoring so much better in first period.
I don't know.
Teachers are more alert as well.
Just like that, I'd like to know.
I don't know if the same sleep studies indicate amount of required sleep for adults that they do for kids.
I don't know.
But also reduced obesity, eating disorders, improved mood. They talked about reduced risk of substance abuse, high-risk health behaviors, things like drinking caffeine, that there was a reduction in that. Fewer car crashes, psychomotor performance being better. So that just to give, it's mostly to give you access to the links that I've given and additional resources I've given if you need to look into any of that, and just to provide that background information on. Of course, these groups are coming out very strongly that schools should be starting later than 8:30 for these middle and high school students. So I didn't know if the board had any questions.
No, I thought there was one thing that stood out to me that I had thought about when I was thinking of like the negativity. You know, part of it was you do get into rush hour. That was an interesting point. So I mean, just another thing that I thought to think about. Yeah.
That's a big study.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why
You mean for
No, for the busing for the
Yeah,
kids that are
right.
driving.
Busing your kids.
You know.
Which is why, Robin, the next steps for phase 2, when I give these 4 sample things, 4 sample options, the 8 o'clock and 8:05, 8:15, 8:20, and 8:30, 8:35 start time, and then the option of what would it be just to not have kids get on a bus before 7 a.m. When I look at all of those, these, as I said before, are brush strokes. You need, if you're moving to the next level where we have an action plan and a steering committee and consultants, you need transportation consultants, you need people who are coming who are actually studying our transportation patterns in Armonk, Bedford, and Pleasantville, and that would be, I would imagine, next year if the board wanted to move forward with even going in that direction.
When we're looking at this, are school districts that have looked at it taking the view that it's not worth to pursue it unless there is a market change in the time? No, you're not going to do this for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. You're doing this to
That's not true.
45 minutes or an hour. I mean,
It's not true because
okay,
at the end of the
hold
week,
on.
it's an hour of sleep for a child.
Right.
15 minutes is an hour of sleep.
15 minutes a day.
Right.
Is an hour of sleep.
But is that the same thing?
It's 4
15
hours
minutes
a
a
month.
day is that really the right thinking? In other words, is 15 minutes a day saying, okay, I'm going to sleep 15 minutes a day, so I'm going to be much more refreshed because at the end of the week I've slept 15 minutes longer per day? Is that really true? As opposed, I guess you could exponent that, exponentially extrapolate that.
Extrapolate it.
Yeah.
You're saying, man, I have
Does
300,
15 minutes
I've
make
got
a
300
difference?
extra hours a year. How come I don't feel refreshed? You know, it's 15 minutes a
think
day.
Sometimes you
Yeah.
hit a snooze.
But
button
that's not really my
and
question. I'm not really interested in the answer.
Okay.
I think it's a silly question. But my question is whether or not, has there been a minimum period? In other words, is it minimum of a half hour, 45 minutes? Or what's been the least
No,
amount of
they're not doing
time?
that, Ira, because
that the
every
schools
school
have
has
said?
different start times.
I mean, if you're in
So they
Wyoming and
can't
you're
recommend-
dealing with ranchers and cattle, I mean,
They're
it
recommending
may be different.
8:30. That's
Yeah.
what they're recommending.
I mean, I just texted my partner in California, because her daughter is in middle school. I said, what time does your school start? She goes, 8:40. We looked at it, the school board looked at it, and they said, no earlier than 8:30. And they've been very, very pleased with it.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's a
Yeah.
pretty similar suburb
Well, I
to
think
us.
all we have to look at is what are the sleep patterns that have been
Interesting topic.
diagnosed, right? That have been explained to us, the amount of sleep that kids are supposed to be getting, the amount of sleep that our kids are claiming they're getting,
Yeah, that's always.
and looking at what the recommendation for start times is. And, you know, it is up to the board to decide at a certain moment, does 15 minutes a day matter? Does an hour a week, 4 hours a month, and 40 hours a year
Well,
matter
I
to
think-
make that kind of
I
change?
You know, I
don't
think
know if
what we,
that's the right
do, if we're
process.
gonna do that, because none of us are doctors, I guess what we have to decide is we look at this research and say, okay, we're going to blind faith, trust that they're telling us 8:30 is kind of like the leap of faith that we would end up having to make.
Mhm.
Because we're not gonna be able to say whether that 15 minutes or not, we're going to have to take.
We don't
that.
have the right to
I guess this
unilaterally
is
change
it's
school
also
time.
a cost benefit, so
Right.
if we know, based on all the studies, that it's better from a health perspective, but everything has trade-offs, so there's essentially the economic trade-off of the complexity of doing it, the cost of the bus change, the cost of the scheduling, and what that might do to after school, so the trade, I guess,
It's a balancing
we
act,
kind of
the
have to weigh
benefits
the
versus.
benefit
Yeah.
versus that, and we made a comment before, that the easiest thing, can you get kids to go to bed early? I mean, not that it works in my house, but like, we try to do a lights out, time frame, and it doesn't seem to work all the time, but, I mean, I think it's a
Right.
cultural thing that, David Letterman, late night with David Letterman, right? So, I mean, I think it's a challenging thing, and so Robin, what I was about to say is, I mean, the studies, I haven't read all of them, but I think I don't think it's blind faith. I think we know that.
No, that's what I'm saying is
right.
we have to take the science and say, we believe the science. That's what I'm saying,
Right,
blind
right,
faith.
yep.
I'm saying, we're not gonna reinvent the wheel here. They're telling us 8:30. We say, yeah, okay.
Well, I don't know if they're
believe
saying a
that.
time, I don't know if there's a time, right?
That's the time they're saying.
That's their recommendation.
That's
Their recommendation.
This is a fascinating subject.
It is.
It is.
Because some of it, there's only so much we can do, and so much happens in the home. I mean, we could start classes at 10 o'clock, but if the kids are up all night on social media, what difference does it make? So we don't know what goes on.
That's what each of the
in every
studies
That's what the
house.
said.
studies said. And
And
also,
Right.
at Westport, we've discussed it, and Dobbs Ferry is having success. However, they're getting fined because they're going late to some of their sporting events. They're having some, but they felt the benefit to their children, but they don't have busing.
I
So they're in a
think,
totally
to me, the best way to approach this, these discussions go on ad infinitum, because it lends itself to that, given the data and the study and the subject matter. You've set out 3 tranches, basically. And you believe we can get through tranche 3 by year end?
Keeping in mind that these are brushstrokes.
Yes,
This is
no, I
not
understand.
hiring consultants or doing anything
Right.
like that. I think we can get through the 4 phases by the end of this school year.
Well, putting aside community input, because I think, before we get there, I think we'd have to really have an idea from the board where we think this ought to head. Because I think it's risky to do it in a different order. But union contracts is a big issue too. If we decide to proceed, the timing of it our hands may be tied for a while. But
So for a
That's
timing
interesting.
perspective, actually, you want to speak first?
Yeah, no, sure. So, I mean, I think what's interesting about this issue is that there are many studies out there on many things from many reputable universities, and you always have to take them with a little bit of a grain of salt, because one study here, one study there, regardless of where they come from. With this issue in particular, because the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics have both come out so strongly, like, you really, I think, going back to your question about, should we get doctors to come in? I mean, I don't think we need doctors to go in, because it seems abundantly clear from the science that this is something that they feel strongly about, and that there's a big body of research that backs it up. So that's good. And I think what your process does, hopefully, is gets us to a point, because this is complex, and this could be too costly, we don't know, but it gets us to a point where at least we have some basis to have a discussion, like a logical discussion that says, can we figure out a creative way to do it that isn't particularly costly? Is it very costly, and in which case, can that be something we can do in this kind of environment where we have SALT and all kinds of issues with tax cap and all the other issues, or does it not? Or is it somewhere in between? And I think there is a continuum, because 8:30 is the recommendation, but right now we have kids being picked up at 6:45 or 6:50 in the morning, and so who knows where we end up when we look at busing even more precisely. So I like the phases, and I think that it's a question, Ira, that you raised, which is an important one, about community input, because I think that the time for steering committees or serious involvement is not through these phases, because we're
Exactly.
not there yet. But we do have, I'm sure, people that have views on this that at some juncture, can make themselves.
I think it's important, and I'll say this to everyone, that our job here is not to provide expectations that may not be met, or that may not be fully vetted, or that may just be part of our discussing the issue. And I think managing expectations in an issue like this is very, very important. And we're a long way from initial discussion to final decision. And I think everybody has to understand that. This is really
A gathering
a
time.
work.
This
This
is
is
a work
really
in
a work
progress.
in progress. And the other point I just wanted to make is that the issue of bus schedules, forget about preliminary cost estimate. I think if we're really going to do this, you may want to re-examine the whole bus route issue from the ground up and really see, these bus routes were put in play when Guy Elmore was running the buses.
And that would take place if you actually went to a steering committee and had
It's-
consultants.
These are really significant studies and issues that have, think about cost impact. It has serious impact in terms of people's lives. They really are. These are real, this is a serious impact.
This, process is gonna potentially open up a Pandora's box, but in a good way. I mean, we're really gonna drill down and look into some of these issues. We may find some really good improvements.
You never know what grade.
I think the district has done so much, thankfully, to look at the wellness of our community, of our students, and I think, Jen, you've done a wonderful job, collecting data and research. I feel very comfortable moving ahead and getting some answers to some of these things, so we can really look at it.
Yeah, I think for now, we're getting in a sandbox with all of this,
Yeah.
and we are looking at it and exploring it, playing with it, talking about it.
They just got an extra hour's sleep last week. What more do they want?
Yeah. I've exhausted that extra hour
It
of
wasn't
sleep
on a
already.
school night.
Just one more brief comment. Private schools, is there a typical, do we have any data from private schools in and around that? And is that typical
I
for,
think-
What was Right Country Day do?
They're not 6:45, although some of them are coming from longer distances. But I
Or the
think it's
master
probably
school
30
or the other
yeah.
schools.
Or boarding schools for that matter?
Well, the
just
schools
as
are
the-
starting later, but they're also getting picked up here at an earlier hour to go
Right.
there. So unless
Right.
kids are driving themselves,
Right.
kids who are out of district could be in an out-of-district school in Tarrytown. And so, buses take a longer amount of time to get there than cars, it depends on but we're busing kids out early. We have our first buses that leave the bus yard for out-of-district kids at 6:30 in the morning.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
dark.
I will tell you, we moved from the Bedford side to town, and the quality of life, just commuting in the morning, getting, and it's about a
20 minutes.
half an hour
You shouldn't say
difference.
that to your superintendent, deputy superintendent, and assistant superintendent who drive a long way to work.
Or to your board president who lives in the Bedford side of town.
Yeah. No, but you're right. You're absolutely
And
right.
the bus would come before
It's
7 in the
true.
morning. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
different quality of life for your
6:50.
kids.
It is. It's a
Yeah.
big, it's to get up dark and, before 7 a.m.
Yeah.
is hard.
They're probably much better.
Yeah, you have to look at these things, it's important.
It'll be more challenging for the next generation of workers
Close in New York.
to work on.
So the next time I look forward to phase 2, I'm hoping to have this by December. If not, it will be in January because I can do the first part of the New York, all of these schools. I mean, I'm pretty deep into that already. I've set out the sample start times and I'm waiting for transportation to give us what would this look like regarding our staff, regarding our number of buses, and that's if the runs would work. And so I'm hoping to get that either December or January, and phase 3 certainly by April or May.
Great.
This is great.
Very
Thank-
interesting.
very well thought
This is
out.
just one little line in our goals. Look at all
It's
this
one-
work it's
Yeah.
Do you know,
engendered.
Ira, that's what I said, that one little line. It's going to take up some time, but it's worth the
Well,
time.
It's an interesting subject.
Yeah,
It really is.
it's worth it. I just feel that we
Alright,
have to do that due diligence.
Great.
Let's go.
All right,
Polls
we're
are
gonna go
closed.
to,
Polls are closed in New York.
Superintendent's update.
Polls are closed. Okay, so to the superintendent's update. I'm going to get off this screen. And yeah, okay. I first would like to start with just a description. The board is very aware. Anybody who's in the community who has children is very aware. We had an incident at the bus garage last Friday. It involved a school.
Whether they thought that his Kavanaugh vote was important to them.
We had a, I'll talk over, yeah,
Sorry about that.
that's okay. We had a yellow van that was on fire and spread to 5 other yellow vans. I know that I've sent these communications out to the public, but we do have a public that watches our board meetings and is not necessarily privy to some email blasts that I send out to the community. So just so you know, I sent 3 email blasts out, one Friday night when the incident happened, Saturday during the day, and another one last night. And just to recap the email blast that I sent out last night, just know that in addition to the North Castle Police and the work they're doing to support this investigation, we have the Westchester County Origin and Means team that is doing an investigation for us. Our North Castle Police has also been supportive now in us reaching out to the New York State Fire Center, which is a division of Homeland Security, and they are also looking at information from the incident to try to determine what the cause is of this. I expressed in these emails that we had another fire incident last summer involving 3 buses that had actually been unused for an entire month. At the time, we were told that it was likely that a mouse had chewed through the wires and had caused that fire. Knowing that buses are connected to their batteries and there is an opportunity for that to happen, it was understandable. Understand that the district is looking at whatever we can look at to determine the cause of this fire. It is troubling for a community to know that 3 buses caught fire last summer and that 6 vans were taken in this fire last Friday night. So we are not trying to excuse any answer. We do not have an answer. We need to really wait for the reports to come back. It would be premature for me to say anything other than that. We also, just as a district, we are looking at all these additional efforts for our own safety. This week, the Department of Transportation was at our bus garage and they were overseeing our servicing. We are contracting with 2 outside bus companies that are our distributors to bring in tech teams to review all of the electricity of each of these buses, all of the circuitry, and other drills for kids at the middle school and the high school level, making sure that we're conducting those drills so kids are actually familiar with how to open bus doors. And I do not want to shadow the urgency of this with statistics about bus safety. I don't want people to think I'm belittling an incident that occurred and saying, oh, well, you're 70 times safer to travel on a bus to school than a car. I mean, there are statistics out there for people who are interested. Our goal is to just secure our students, our bus depot, to the best of our ability, and to the best of our ability, reach out to those organizations that can really help us uncover what happened. So that is my report on that.
And just to add 2 quick thoughts. One is that while we're waiting for the findings of this investigation, I think the approach that we're taking as a district is to, through all different channels, regardless of why this happened, to make sure that we're doing everything we can in our power to make sure it never happens again. So that includes security, it includes maintenance, it includes equipment. It's just trying to look at every possible scenario until we get more information.
Until we get another answer.
And then the second is just to thank our local responders who arrived at the scene really quickly, and they were incredibly professional and helpful in getting the situation under control, and then to thank the county and ultimately the state that can provide additional resources into the investigatory angle. So we appreciate all the help that we're getting.
And to thank our school board president and our school board members who came to the scene and spent countless hours in the rain, helping to coordinate these efforts. I appreciate that very much. Yes.
Gina.
Thank you, Gina.
And just one thing finally before I go, I always like to end with students. First of all, congratulations to the Rising Scientist Award. Ellen Amico for the 2018 Rising Scientist Award. She's received a scholarship and they're going to have a play in her state-of-the-art clinical care for children and extensive educational resources to school. So we are very proud of you. The second thing I want to point out is if you have the opportunity, board members, to take a look at some of the artwork that's here. This is advanced drawing and painting class.
It's great.
When my office used to be across the hall and we would put art up in the hallways, I would actually take the one that I liked the most and put it next to my office. And when I looked around the room, I have to say that this actually is my favorite. It was placed there not by me, but Nina Decker, and just these are chalk pastels on colored paper, and they are outstanding. And the last thing that I want to do, because I know that I'm going to have a couple of people, we're going to have big hits on Bobcat TV for watching tonight's board meeting, not for sleep school start times, but Ms. Olivetto's class, I would like to give a shout out to. I attended their class before Halloween, and we talked about Halloween safety, and the kids asked me what my favorite candy was, and I told them Mounds and Almond Joy. And apparently the next day and for a few days, kids were coming in with Ziploc bags with Dr. Lamia written on them with all of these treats. And I love the 1977, it even says it, the 1977 Ritz cracker can, which I'm supposed to return. Trick or treat, Dr. Lamia, happy Halloween 2018, enjoy from class 4 Olivetto.
That's great.
So, and look, I mean, I couldn't, there's a lifetime of chocolates in here to share. So I just want to say that made the superintendent's Monday morning. I'm going to pass them. So thank you so much to Ms. Olivetto's class. I enjoy spending time with you, and you are incredibly thoughtful.
Very nice. Love that.
How cute is that?
That's great.
I just picture kids coming in with Ziploc bags with Dr. Lamia on them with the Mounds of Almond.
You notice those are like two lowest rated candies on the kid.
I love the slow selling candy.
We've had enough.
This is not allowed.
You want one?
I'm good, thank you.
Enjoy.
And that's all I have for tonight.
All right.
I don't have candy to give out to you.
Oh.
Let me update you on something we're doing. And this relates to your first goal on excellence in teaching and learning, to the global competence and leadership goal. So I'm going to give a report. I have 3 things to report related to our Global Scholars Program. We're in year 2 of that. You saw Abby here this evening, who's starting to study cybersecurity. 3 things that I'm doing. First is I'm starting a Global Scholar Study Group to refine our vision, make sure we have an articulated vision for the Global Competence Initiative in the middle and high school, and specifically Global Scholars. And we are also evaluating our current middle school and high school programs related to global competence to see what we're currently doing that align to our vision. And then what are some new areas we need to address? Are there any opportunities that we could start enriching in middle and high school related to that? So the study group will help us think through that. I'll have a committee of administrators, teachers, and students on that committee. I'll be asking some students from the Global Scholars course to be on this committee. Then that group will also help me oversee 2 more things I'll tell you about. One is a review of our program. You're familiar with the Tri-States Consortium, which is a group of high-performing districts in Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York that we belong to. And every 4 or 5 years, they do a study of a program. You've been involved in that. It was world language the last time. We do reports every time they come in. We're going to ask them to come in and look at our Global Scholars Program. They're going to come in for a pre-meeting this spring, and then they're going to come back next year for more in-depth. So we're really using them to help guide us a little bit. So it's a little different than a full evaluation and benchmarking, but more of, here's our thinking, give us some help in anything you might see that we might be missing or overseeing, or any suggestions in the direction we're heading. So that's more of a programmatic overview. And then more specifically with Global Scholars, we've been working with World Savvy, which is one of the 2 organizations that we've been using a lot of their resources in the development of the Global Scholars Program. The Asia Society is another one, and they're really 2 leading organizations in global competence. We're going to ask World Savvy to come in and evaluate our current sort of where we are with student outcomes related to our Global Scholars Program. So part of this committee will be helping us design that study with World Savvy. We're going to be looking at what are the questions we want to know in terms of the outcomes we expect of students as a result of our Global Scholars Program. And World Savvy will go into a very in-depth study of that at our high school. And we should have that report by the end of this year. And the committee will help design that and work with World Savvy in implementing that. So those are 2 things that'll help us make sure that we're on the right footing, and also give us some benchmark idea of where we are with students right now, and then we can do some follow-up studies in the next few years to make sure that we're heading in the right direction with what we expect global competence to achieve.
So you don't think it's not too soon in our stage where we are in global competency to have them come in and look at it?
Yeah, in terms of the World Savvy, I think I'd like some benchmarks. So if we say these are the outcomes we expect our graduates to have, we can at least get some baseline data, and then if we come back 3 years later, 5 years later, we can see if we're seeing some gains in that area, and then it's actually having an impact. So I thought it would be a good starting point, and that might help us redirect our efforts a little bit as well and do some calibration.
Tim, when I was working in the college office, many of the schools are asking, they're taking a wait and see. They understand what our science research is.
Yep.
They're taking a wait and see how the first whole rotation goes through.
Right.
They want to see the success, how the success, because I said, what do you think about this great program?
Yeah.
They're taking a wait and see until the whole first, that seems
Is that
to
what
be-
their representatives told you?
The representatives are telling me in the college office, they're like, they don't understand it yet. Even though it's well written in our literature, they want to see the results of a full 3-year process.
Yeah, so this data may help them as well, so we can sort of inform their thinking about it.
I wonder if we can update, once you get that data, if we can update the little blurb that's in the college office that we hand them
Certainly.
when they come.
That's a good idea. Thank you. So that's my update.
And Jim is not here.
You listen.
And Jim's last day is Friday, and we're having a not surprise breakfast for him on Thursday at the district office. We had to tell him, we have to make sure he's here. And, you know, Jim, I'm sure, is not watching this board meeting. Considering he's not here tonight, he's leaving the district, and he's on another board in the town where he lives. And I believe he's going to another interim assignment after this one, so Jim probably, but it has to be said that he has done a great job in this district in the past year and few months to support us during a very critical time. He is a fantastic professional, really knowledgeable, and has made us very successful, so we're grateful.
We'll miss him.
Yeah,
He
we will.
was
I will
incredible.
definitely miss him.
Yep.
He really did come through for us.
Yeah.
He really did. He really did.
And I mean, I remember when we were doing the search, and Jim said, I want to retire at some point. If you do not find someone that you feel is appropriate, I will not leave. I mean, that's incredible for somebody to say who's really wants to retire someday. He promises after this next interim position, which is supposed to be very short, that he will retire.
So Kelly will be at our next.
Yes, he starts Tuesday.
That's great.
So at the
And
December
in our
meeting.
next meeting.
Yeah.
A month or whatever.
Yes, he will. And what's great is that Kelly communicated to me twice by email and once by phone after the incident at the bus garage. Yeah, I didn't even think to reach out to him at this point because we're just dealing with our own. But he reached out to figure out, you know, just to go through the steps with me so that he's right on board on Tuesday, which is great.
Very
Yeah.
professional.
And Jim will stay within arm's reach to help with
Yes,
that.
yeah. He will. And Kelly has been in 2 days already working with Jim for the day to figure that out, yeah. Yeah.
You feel good about it?
Yes.
Yeah, good, very good. Good.
That's what really
We
matters.
all look that way. It was
Well,
very
yeah, that's right. It is what
Yes.
matters.
But I will miss Jim. Jim was a tremendous help to me. Definitely.
But,
Yeah.
you know, it has to be said also, Susan, that before Jim ever came to us, there was a long time where you were running that entire business office.
Yes.
Without looking for, you know, additional help, you were doing so much to support that office.
And Mary helped
Appreciate
as
it.
well.
Yeah.
Mary Jones. Everyone.
Greatly appreciate your efforts.
Thank you. My pleasure. Always is.
And Jim was very complimentary. He's always,
Oh, thank
always
you.
says he couldn't have transitioned as easily without you.
And before Jim, Greg said the same thing.
Thank you.
And before Greg,
Yeah.
All right.
That's like
let's
me.
go. Polls are waiting.
All right.
Is that it on your end?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so then board reports. The only thing I have to report, which will take literally 60 seconds, is went to the convention, which was, I think, overall very useful. There was a good legal session that we went to, school law, and then I did go to the business meeting.
You did?
Yeah, which is the first time I've
You
been.
have the clicker or whatever it
To
is?
have the old-fashioned,
Yeah.
hold the sign up. And there were a series of resolutions that I think are constructive in terms of trying to move things forward, especially around school safety and trying to get support from the state around school safety, and also unfunded mandates that, of course, none of us are looking for more of. So I think it was a constructive, good session. Yeah. Anybody else have any board reports?
Oh, not a report, but in the last 2 weeks, I've had the opportunity to spend just a couple minutes with County Executive Latimer and Dave Buchwald. You should know the high regard they hold Byram Hills and the Board of Education in. And they don't have to say it, but they went out of their way to say it. So I thought it was very nice of them to comment. I thought I'd share the congratulations with all of you because they were truly genuine in that. And then they've both been supporters of Byram Hills over the years and their various other political, Dave Buchwald in the Assembly, but when George was on the council in White Plains and Westchester County representative, he was always supportive of us. So it was nice. It was nice that he said it. So.
Yes. All right, then we go to communications from the board. There was one, it was related to just a security suggestion. And then I think that brings us to the minutes. I guess I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes from October 9th and from October 23rd.
So moved.
Second.
And it should be noted that, Ira, based on your feedback just around the recording of the vote, it's been reflected now properly where our names are attached to the vote.
That was my recollection. Thank you, Jen, for following up on that.
So all in favor of the minutes? Unless anybody has any comments? No? Okay, good. All right.
A plus, Donna.
Thank you,
Yes,
Donna.
well done there.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? We're adjourned. Good night.